welcome to Indiana Landmarks Center. And it's so great to be live in person. It's the first time in 2 years we as an Indiana Automotive group have been able to get together in person. So it's great to see half your faces. If you're on Zoom, joining us on the Zoom cast from around the world, wish we could see your full faces. But it's so great to be back together again. And we couldn't appreciate your support more. I'm Dave Wilson, and I have the pleasure of being the chair of the Indiana Automotive Board, an affinity group of Indiana landmarks dedicated to the automotive heritage. Let me make sure I get my slides going. Okay. Did it go? Excellent. All right. In Indiana Automotive, which is an affinity group of Indiana landmarks that is designed to celebrate and preserve the great heritage that is Indiana's automotive history. We couldn't be more thankful for Indiana Landmarks and the leadership of Marsh Davis to allow our group to thrive with some great events that we'll talk about coming up in 2022 and touch base a little bit on the things that the board and the group has done in the pandemic era here to keep us engaged with everyone and to continue to deliver programming that matters to our great automotive enthusiasts. For instance, we had a virtual talk, as most things went virtual, thanks to one of our board members, Maddie Bennett, and Jelaine King from the product engineer at the Diamond Chain Company. We had, you may have seen them in the news as being sold and perhaps moving out of Indiana, but that was the home of the famous Diamond Chain Company, which included an owner by the name of Arthur Newby, who is, you may recognize as one of the founders of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and moved from bicycle chains to other uses, including the Wright brothers and obviously automobiles and the chain drives. A little bit later, we had an online virtual talking track. We normally in April have got kind of a racing themed talk here in the past. It's been with Donald Davidson and other great personalities that he's interviewed. This time we had the chance to go with Mark Utzler, who is one of the co-founders of the Indiana Racing Memorial Association, which for the past number of years has been dedicated to honoring people and places and locations throughout the state of Indiana that have got a connection and contribution to the racing portion of Indiana's automotive heritage. In June, we made the attempt to be back in person with a limited members only kind of car show, kind of a car show and shine here in the lot. We had some great vehicles show up socially distanced, and a couple that we were very much interested in taking a ride around, but unfortunately the downtown construction kind of removed that as a possibility. So if you had a chance to join us there, that was a great one. And most recently, we had an online presentation with Bob Hunt and Larry Missing of the Indiana National Road Association, talking about the Indiana National Road, America's first highway, and the great landmarks that you can see when you start over in Richmond and move across our state. Incidentally, one of the roles of Indiana Automotive is to preserve and recommend to landmarks places of significant interest that should be saved or promoted, preserved, and trying to increase the visibility of the many places throughout our state that have a connection to the history. And Indiana Automotive provided a grant to the Indiana National Road to develop a website and a particular web page and an app that highlighted specific locations where if you were to spend a day going east or west to east on the Indiana National Road, that highlights some great stopping points and some landmarks, which if you're ever getting back out on the road, that's a great resource. All of those talks are still available on the Indiana Landmarks YouTube page, so you can check those out. We have had some great in-person programming in the past, thanks to one of our board members, Sue Kennedy, and her husband, Larry. And in the past, you may have attended the Weekend in French Lick where we were able to take in some private collections, get to see some incredible cars that were part of private collections and not available to be seen by the public. Followed the year later by a long weekend in Auburn, where we hit, I believe, 4 different museums as a group, and then also some private collections. So our hope has always been to deliver incredible programming to you, the members, and make your support seem like it's just an afterthought in your pocketbooks, because you're investing in great experiences while we're preserving and trying to promote the great history. So our hope and our intent is to be back in June of 2022 with a in-person weekend tour up in South Bend, Indiana, which obviously has the home of the great Studebaker factory and is also part of some office renovations that Landmark's been a part of to kind of keep and preserve the physical structures and make those into multi-use and still be a part of those great communities. So keep an eye out on our newsletters, and if you're not getting the magazine, make sure you're on the list. So South Bend in 2022. Now, this is kind of a volunteer advisory board as an affinity group. And a group of us have kind of meet monthly to kind of talk about the programming effects and the events that we can do and the content that would be most interested to you. As part of the COVID, under our extraordinary circumstances, we typically have terms. Everyone's terms was bumped a year, including the kind of a senior advisory group to that, the board chair and officers. But we do have an opportunity to add a new member this year. And well, actually, I jumped ahead. So there are the officers, which myself as chair, Sue Kennedy, who we mentioned, Jeff Congdon, Thomas Kreider-Reed, who's with us here tonight. So this is our group that kind of keeps us on track. And I guess we kind of propose that slate be moved forward for 2022, along with our proposed to join the board is Jason Van Sickle, who is the curator of vehicles at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. One of the things we try to do is balance some enthusiasts, some knowledge, some ownership, some history from all different places. And as we talk about Indiana's automotive history, we think the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum is probably a pretty good pickup for us. And so we're thrilled to propose that the curator, Jason Van Sickle, join us in our endeavors moving forward. So with that, I would ask that the group and entertain a motion to approve the slate as presented, and also the election of Jason to the group. Thank you very much, sir. A second? All right, all in favor as we move forward? Excellent. And did you count the hundreds that are on Zoom worldwide? I saw a lot of hands go up. Excellent. Well, you're a generous group, and thank you very much. As I mentioned, the board of directors, kind of a volunteer advisory group that meets regularly. I want to thank all of them for their time and dedication, particularly meeting through Zoom, which isn't the easiest throughout the past year to deliver the programming that we have and start planning for next year. So it's going to be a great year. If you're interested in joining the board, you've seen Jessica Kramer's name all over the place, and she's here tonight. And so please talk to her or me and talk a little bit about your interest, and we'll kind of go from there. So that is enough housekeeping, and it is time for the main event and on to our show. We've talked about Indiana automotive history, and most people tend to think instantly to the great cars and vehicles and manufacturers that were in this state: Stutz, Marmon, Auburn, Cord, Duesenberg, Studebaker, the usual. But Indiana's automotive history is so much more than simply automotive car production. And for more than 100 years, Cummins has been a leader in engine development and innovations. Started by Clessie Cummins, a farm boy who began his career as a chauffeur and mechanic. Cummins has made significant contributions through its diesel engine and other innovations to the automotive industry, and 58,000 employees around the world can certainly attest to that. We are fortunate to have their headquarters be in Columbus, Indiana, which for Indiana Landmarks is sort of a double threat for us. Their automotive history is certainly world-renowned. And as you know from Columbus, the architecture and the community that they have supported down there in terms of the physical places that they have positively impacted. So we are thrilled to have tonight some guest speakers from the Cummins Heritage Center who can talk a little bit about Cummins' not only past, history, and present. As you know, they've expanded to Indianapolis, and with the innovations and evolutions in technology and green, that they are well poised for the next 100 years of innovation. So today we're going to have lead archivist Lori Lindberg, the restoration manager Bruce Watson, and historian Stephen Butler share a little bit about Cummins' history and present and future. And so we're honored to have them here tonight for Cummins Engines, Architecture, and Innovation. So would you please welcome Lori Lindberg, lead archivist for Cummins.
Thank you, Dave. All right. So I'm going to take my mask off and I'll put it back on. I want to thank you for having us here this evening at Indiana Landmarks Automotive Affinity Group 2021 annual meeting. We are certainly delighted to be here. This is our first full foray into the public arena since becoming the Cummins Heritage Center in mid-2020. We're excited to tell you about our great company, Cummins Inc., via our role as the chroniclers of facts and the collector of records, objects, and artifacts that help tell our great American and Hoosier story. The title of our talk has the thread of innovation throughout, so we'll tell you a little bit about our past, a little bit about our present, and even our future of innovation, as seen through some of the facts and materials we have and we will collect. The first person to speak will be our Heritage Restoration Manager, Bruce Watson, followed by Cummins historian, Stephen Butler. And I'll wind it up talking about the future of Cummins. We hope you enjoy it. Bruce?
Thank you, Lori. So I want to talk tonight about some of the past history of innovation at Cummins. So let's just start with young Clessie Cummins. So this was years before the company was started. Clessie and his brother-in-law had a little boat that they kept on the Ohio River down around Madison. And they decided they wanted to take a little trip in their boat. So they set off for New Orleans. And the boat had a little gasoline engine in it. And guess what? Before they got to New Orleans, they ran out of gasoline. And so gasoline at this time, you didn't find gas stations on every street corner. Gasoline was kind of a rare exotic fuel that wasn't easily found, and if you could find it, it was expensive. But kerosene or home heating oil or lamp oil, whatever you wanted to call it, was plentiful. Every house had a barrel of home heating oil. It was cheap, it was plentiful. So Clessie managed to take a piece of copper tubing and wrap it around the exhaust pipe of the gasoline engine and could start the engine on gasoline, but then once the engine was warmed up, he could switch it over to run on kerosene. And so that kind of became Clessie's mission in life. Why do we have to buy this expensive gasoline? Why can't we make an engine that runs on this cheap, available home heating oil? So that's what Clessie set out to do. Oh, there we go. So this was Cummins' first product. This is an engine that, so this started in 1919. This is an engine architecture that was developed around gasoline engines, but Clessey licensed a fuel system that could convert this architecture to run on kerosene, what we now know as diesel fuel. So from there, this was kind of Cummins' first real product that was developed in-house, as opposed to sort of pulling these other architectures together. It used a Cummins designed fuel system that was what we called a unit injector, where you have a dedicated injector and rocker arm for each cylinder. And that became the fuel system architecture that took Cummins into the next 80 years. So you're going to hear a lot about fuel injection systems, because for diesel engines, the fuel injection system is everything, and injection pressure is everything. So for Cummins to start out with this in-house unit injector that kind of became the standard, this was a real starter for Cummins. Now, the problem with this engine, though, you know, we say necessity is the mother of invention. So this design offered some opportunities for improvement. One of the things was that, in the red circles there, those were the fuel metering units for each of the 4 cylinders of this 4-cylinder engine. So it was kind of like 4 separate single-cylinder engines, because they each had their own fuel metering unit. The problem with that was it tended to run like 4 separate engines, and one cylinder would always be running a little stronger than the other. And when you got to light load, the engine would tend to sit there and run on a single cylinder rather than on all 4 cylinders. So Cummins' answer to that was what they called the single disc fuel pump. So this was a system that had a single metering unit within the pump, and then a distributor that would distribute that amount of fuel to each of the 4 cylinders. So now all 4 cylinders got the exact same amount of fuel. The other issue with this engine was that the rocker arms and push rods and everything were exposed to the elements, which wasn't unusual at that time. And when this engine was used in like as a genset or a water pump, those tended to operate in pretty clean environments. But they then started using this engine in construction equipment and excavating equipment, which is a very dusty, dirty environment. Now you get dirt clinging on to all these moving parts, and they didn't last very long, we'll put it that way. So that led to the Model U engine, which you can see now the rockers and everything are all enclosed. And this engine then became, in this package form here, very popular as a marine drive unit. So it included a reversing transmission and a starter generator. And one of the things that made it really popular for marine drive is that it was displacing gasoline engines, and gasoline and boats can be a very dangerous combination. The vapors from the gasoline are heavier than air. They tend to settle into the hold of the boat. Now the bottom of the boat is full of gasoline fumes, and if there's any ignition source, it obviously destroys the boat. So for these owners to have diesel fuel now instead of gasoline was a huge safety measure for them, because now they didn't have these volatile gasoline fumes. So in the late 20s, this became a very popular product for Cummins. Cummins still wasn't operating in the black. So to have a product finally that was starting to really make some hay, this was a really good thing. Unfortunately, the stock market crash of '29 pretty much destroyed the luxury yacht market, and that destroyed the market for this engine. So W.G. Irwin, who was Plessy Cummins' banker and financier, thought that was it, and he was ready to dissolve the company. He had drawn up the paperwork to dissolve the company, hadn't filed the paperwork yet because he felt a dedication to the people of Columbus, and he didn't want to put people out of work. He was willing to keep operating at a loss for a little bit longer to help keep those people working and able to feed their families. Well, Plessy got wind that WG was about to shut the company down, and he was just going to have one last go at this. So he took one of these marine drive units and put that engine into a Packard limousine. He went to Indianapolis, found a used Packard limousine. It needed to be a big car to handle this heavy engine, put the Model U engine in that car. And on Christmas Day of 1929, he drove that car down 5th Street in Columbus, Indiana to W.G. Irwin's house and persuaded W.G. to go for a ride in this car. So he took W.G. for a ride, and the story is that he faked some issue and stopped along the way someplace and got out to look and raised the hood to look at the engine. WG got out to look at the engine and saw that it was a Cummins engine. And the story is that up to this point, WG would always refer to that as being, that's Plessy's engine. Oh, that's one of Plessy's engines. After that event, the story is that WG referred to it as our engine. So he was in now. In January of 1930, Plessy drove that car to the New York Auto Show, uninvited, but he knew that all the motoring press would be there and that he could get their attention. And so between the renewed interest of WG and the new interest from the investors based on the trip to the New York Auto Show, they generated enough business that the company could keep going, and we're here today because of that. But that sort of lit a fuse in Plessy. So he took the engine out of the Packard limousine and put it in the Packard Roadster that you see on the top left, drove it from Indiana to Daytona Beach, and established the first diesel land speed record on the beach at Daytona. He came back to Columbus, bought a Duesenberg racing chassis, put the engine in that, drove it back to Daytona, raised the record, and then on the way back went up the East Coast to New York and Washington just to generate press for this thing. But that car was then entered in the 1931 Indianapolis 500, became the first car to go nonstop all 500 miles without a stop for fuel on a few dollars, less than $10 worth of fuel was part of the bragging from that. Plessy still wanted to, thought this diesel engine thing had a bigger future, I guess. And so, we found that the November issue of the Columbus Republic, the local newspaper, had this article that said, you know, this may be a far-reaching engine. This new engine that Cummins is going to start up today, it may be far-reaching, and there's a chance that it will influence the automotive field. So this engine started to find market in heavy-duty trucks. W.G. Irwin was also an investor in Purity stores on the West Coast. So they installed some of these engines in the Purity trucks and in some other small truck fleets. And they did a really good job in the mountains in California, Northern California. So things really started to take off. There was also sort of an industry debate at the time between two-stroke diesels and four-stroke diesels. And as part of the 1934 Indy 500, Klesse entered 2 cars, one a 2-stroke, one a 4-stroke, to try to settle this debate. Well, unfortunately, the 4-stroke car broke a gearbox early on, so it didn't run very long in the race. The 2-stroke finished the race, although it had some issues. But at the end, they tore the engines apart and inspected them. And the conclusion was that the 2-stroke engine was in terrible shape. The 4-stroke engine was in great shape. So there's your answer. The future at Cummins is 4-stroke. Meanwhile, Detroit Diesel, General Motors and Detroit Diesel kept going on the 2-stroke route. And for the next 50 years in the heavy duty truck industry, it was Cummins and Detroit Diesel butting heads against each other, battling for market share. Detroit Diesel with the 2-stroke, Cummins with the 4-stroke. In the late 80s, as you'll see, emissions requirements started coming into stronger play, and Detroit Diesel eventually had to abandon the 2-stroke technology and adopt the 4-stroke technology. So an engine that started in 1932 as the H, then supercharging was added, and it was called the HS engine. New fuel system was added. It became the new H, so it was called the NH. With a turbocharger on it, it became the NT engine. With improved air handling, it became the NTC engine. And if any of you know Cummins products, this turned into a horrid alphabet soup of product names. This is just a fraction of them. But in the end, with an electronic fuel system, it became the N14 engine. So the same basic carcass remained emission certified in North America up into the 90s, and that engine is still produced in Asia and South America today. 1952, Cummins entered another car in the Indianapolis 500. This time it's a Curtiss chassis. So that Curtiss chassis was sort of the standard at Indy at the time. They put a Model J engine in it, qualified at 129 miles an hour on the very last row. It was the next to the last car in the field. But later that year, they took it to Bonneville to the salt flats. It went 160 miles an hour. So pretty big difference. What's this difference all about? Well, if you look at the engine, this is when the car was being built at the Curtiss shop. You see how tall this engine is. And if you'll pardon my crude artwork over there, you can kind of see how this engine sat in the car and how tall it was and how high the center of gravity was. So there wasn't a lot Cummins could do to reduce the weight of the engine. It was always going to be heavier than conventional engines at the time. But how do you lower the center of gravity? Well, what if you took that engine and laid it over on its side so that now all the weight is much lower in the car? That then became a car that was only 31 inches at the base of the windshield. So it reduced the height of the car by 20%. And then if you look at the qualifying speeds, went from essentially the same engine from 129 miles an hour to 138 miles an hour. So this is a case where, and if you look at this picture, so this is the start, the parade lap of the 52 race, and you see the Cummins car on the pole there, and how it's contrasts with all the tall cars of the period. If you look at this same picture, maybe 2 years later, it's just the opposite. The majority of the cars are now low with offset engines, and a few of them still remain that were upright cars. Sorry. Okay, a few years later, you see a horizontal engine in a Kenworth truck. And now this horizontal design let truck manufacturers make a truck that was a lot shorter wheelbase and a lot more maneuverable. So on the left, is kind of a plot of horsepower versus time. So the bottom axis there is kind of from the early 20s to the 90s. And you see that initially we went up and up in power, but eventually power kind of flattened out. We weren't making more powerful engines anymore. But come about the late 80s, now emissions requirements started coming into play. And don't worry about the axes here. I don't want to get too technical. Just think of it, the bottom axis is what we call particulate. So think about that as the stuff that you used to see coming out of diesel engines. And the other axis is the stuff that we don't like that you can't see. But in the late 80s, we were operating clear up in that top right-hand corner. We could tune the engines to have lower NOx or lower particulate, but you tended to just walk on a trade-off. So you could have an engine that was very low NOx, but high particulate. You could tune it differently and have very low particulate, but it would have high NOx. So meanwhile, the target is all the way down here in the left-hand corner. So how do we get out of that? Well, you can't just keep walking back and forth across that trade-off. That's where innovation came in to try to drive down to this very low requirement. So we started out in '87 with some fuel system improvements. And I talked earlier about how fuel system is kind of everything to a diesel engine. In this time, we were at like 16,000 PSI cylinder pressure. And now we started looking at the very fine details of this injection system. And so on the right there is sort of a cartoon of an injector, and those little holes are literally just a few thousandths of an inch in diameter. So we're dealing with very minute details here. 1990, we see even higher injection pressure. We implemented what we called low flow cooling, which lowered the intake air temperature, which helped. And we were down to kind of this area. 94, we had to go even lower. We raised injection pressure, went to air-to-air charge air cooling, so even lower intake temperatures, introduced high efficiency turbochargers and reduced it even more. 98, you see even higher injection pressures, but now we went from mechanically controlled fuel systems to electronically controlled fuel systems, where you could choose your injection timing. You could have any injection timing that you wanted or needed. So that drove things down even further. 2004, we introduced cooled EGR. This also required that the fuel suppliers get the sulfur out of the fuel, because the sulfur would form sulfuric acid and condense and do bad things to engines. Also developed variable geometry turbocharging. And what people don't see is that the electronic controls and the algorithm that control the turbocharger and control the fuel system have to work together in very closely. So that was a big part of the technology development, is the control systems for this, in addition to the hardware changes. 2007, we added a particulate filter. So it is literally a filter in the exhaust system that collects the particulate, and then under other operating conditions, when temperatures are higher, it oxidizes the particulate out of there. And for 2010, we added selective catalyst system. So this reduced the NOx, whereas the particulate, the filter was all about particulate. So in that time, the overall emissions reduction in both NOx and particulate was on the order of 98%. So a huge reduction. Okay, and I'm running a bit over time, but innovation has just always been a part of Cummins. It always will be, as far as I'm concerned. So we went from Plessy's little riverboat trip all the way to 98% reduction in emissions. So that's what I've got. I'll hand it over to Mr. Steve Butler now.
Thanks, Bruce. So I want to shift gears, no pun intended here, to talk about architecture. Cummins' impact on architecture, not only on our own facilities, but also the city of Columbus, is quite well known. In addition, it's other cities other than Columbus that we can talk about later. The Cummins Engine Foundation was founded in 1954 to sort of address all the requests for donations that obviously big companies get anymore. They were one of the first and earliest corporate foundations, and as part of the global giving arm of Cummins Incorporated, with Cummins funding up to 5% of company taxable income. It was a personal conviction of Mr. J.I. Miller, who was the great nephew of Joseph Irwin, or W.G. Irwin, one of the co-founders along with Plessy. And it was his conviction again that donations and the impact on the cities in which we live and work was important. He wanted to improve the educational settings for the students of Columbus. So in a letter to the school board of the Columbus Community Schools in March of '58, Mr. Miller stated, "It was our conviction that the best education program requires each ingredient of it to be the best. Quality of teachers, quality of the curriculum, quality of the administration, and quality of the facilities." And in doing so, Mr. Miller proposed that Cummins contribute the amount of the architect fees for any public school building. And as we know, the architect fees can be a significant part of the total cost. The program was expanded in 1965 to include all schools in Bartholomew County and eventually to all facilities in the county owned and operated by public tax dollars. The use of emerging as well as renowned architects was not, however, limited to public buildings. You're probably aware of the many public buildings in Columbus from renowned architects, but I want to share with you the design history of many of the Cummins buildings and other designs by some of these same renowned architects. The first is Harry Weiss. Harry was responsible for, in the early and mid 50s, for specifying uniformity for Cummins distributorships, as well as other projects within the community for expanding our plant operations. He updated our logo in 1952 to what was called either the Gold Cross or the Iron Cross. And he even designed the color scheme of the 1952 race car that Bruce talked about, the Cummins Diesel Special. From his process and sketchbook that we can find online, you can see his thoughts about the logo. You can see where the applications that he I hit the wrong button there. The applications of, okay, I'll forget that. The facilities buildings, the clothing that people wore, the parts containers, the letterhead, emblems that would go on the finished vehicles. So Harry Weiss was very instrumental with our logo design in the early 50s. Again, I said, as in 52, the diesel that sat on the pole with Freddie Agabation as the driver, Harry designed that color scheme. He also was responsible, as I said, for many of the Cummins facilities. This is the Columbus Engine plant, basically the second production site of engines in Columbus. And between 60 and 65, he was responsible for those additions and expansions of the building. Note the distinctive external element of precast modular concrete panels that are seen in other Harry Weiss designs. I'll show you some pictures in a second of the Cummins Technical Center, where again, this same concept. We also know that Harry Weiss was responsible for the Washington, D.C. Metro. And if you've been in that subway system, again, these same modular precast panels are pretty common. So Harry did design the Cummins Technical Center. The building was started in 65, completed in 68, 360,000 square feet at a cost at that time of $22 million. So again, you can see those precast panels on the right, the cube design of the office building, which was again pretty common to Weiss design. An internal shot, you can see the ceiling, again, looks like an egg crate. There are lighting fixtures inside each of those cells. Both drafting area as well as the office complex. So along that same time, again, because of the Mr. Miller influence, Aero Sarinan designed the Irwin Union Bank in 1954. Now that bank got into financial problems. Cummins took over that particular building in 2009 and renamed it the Cummins Irwin Office Building. So again, all of this from Harry Weiss design. I'm sorry, that was all Aero Sarinan design. So Kevin Roach comes along and we employ him. The extension of that Irwin Bank, the bank was designed by Sarinan, but Roach designed this arcade that attaches to it, designed that in 72. And again, when we took over the bank building in 09, we renamed that the Cummins Irwin Office Building Arcade. Kevin was also responsible for the design of the Columbus Mid-Range Engine Plant, which is located in Walesboro, Indiana, about 5 minutes south of Columbus. This structure originally started out as a component manufacturing plant, but it's now the production facility of the 6.7 liter turbo diesel pickup that's used in the Dodge Ram pickup truck. The building is partially underground, which you'll see in the next photo, and originally designed that it had parking on the top of the building, but that's been discontinued. So there's a nighttime view, partially underground. Kevin Roach also is responsible for our corporate office building. We called it the COB, the Corporate Office Building in downtown Columbus, which opened in 1985. Particular concept of the building, you see the offices below. The north-facing structure was windows. The south-facing structure was mirrors. So you got the light from the north windows, but you avoided the heat from the south windows. Also in our lobby is a exploded engine that was designed by Rudolph de Herrick. When we renovated that building a couple of years ago, that structure was maintained and actually moved and still hangs in the lobby of that corporate office building. When the corporate office building was built, the original manufacturing plant up here in the upper left is where Clessey started building engines in 1919. That particular section on the left has been renovated and is now restored and serves in the center of the complex. Down here, you can see during construction where it was, and this is the finished product, where the corporate office building wraps around that Sarinan building. It started out as a cereal mill, and then Clessy moved in 1919, and then there were other uses after that when we moved to the Columbus Engine plant in roughly 1926. Kevin Roach also designed some other additions to the Columbus Engine plant, CEP, in 1996. This is the main entrance off of Central Avenue. Opened again in 1996. This was previously a location for the production of the ISV 5.0 liter engine that was utilized in the Nissan pickup truck. It's now used for production of alternative power products such as batteries, hydrogen development, and some of the innovation that Lori's going to talk about in a moment. Some of the other notable architects in the community and Cummins buildings. We opened a child development center for Cummins employees to take care of their kids while they worked for the company. This opened in 2001. We opened what was called the Commons office building in downtown Columbus near the main headquarters building. That was opened in 2009 by Cotter Kim. As you're aware, here in Indianapolis, the Cummins distribution business headquarters, we were in a couple different buildings in downtown Indianapolis, consolidated that, expanded operations into this building that was designed by Deborah Burke Partners. And finally, the corporate office building, I showed you the interior pictures earlier from Kevin Roche. In 2018, that was remodeled by a group called Ratio Architects. Very much an open concept, no assigned desks, no assigned cubes or offices. People come and go and just claim space. So they've got they don't have files. They just carry everything in their laptop. Not the way it was when I went through my training and stuff like that. But that is, that's the impact that Cummins has had not only on the community, but also on our own buildings, is using renowned, well-known architects and enjoying the fruits of that design. So I'll turn this over to Lori, who's going to talk about some of the innovation.
Thank you, Steve. Take this off again. All right. All right. My colleagues and their presentations tell just some of the story of how, over the past century, our dedicated and creative leaders and employees, reliable and innovative products, and our customer and community-focused practices fulfill our mission of making people's lives better by powering a more prosperous world. Now it's my turn to tell you a bit about how that past will help to inform our future. As Bruce noted, Cummins was the result of an unlikely partnership between a banker and an inventor who shared a belief in the power of ideas and a vision for what ingenuity and hard work would create. The men were Clessy Cummins and W.G. Irwin, visionaries who saw the potential and power of the simple diesel engine. As one of the 200 companies that were licensed to produce diesel engines, Cummins took the available technology and transformed diesel into a reliable and useful power source. To promote the diesel engines, as you saw, Classy did a lot of creative events to let the world see the reliable power of diesel. The Irwin family believed in diesel technology and understood the importance of taking the long view, that investing in innovative ideas takes time. As Bruce noted, our first product, produced in April 1919, was the V diesel engine. It took 18 years before Cummins earned its first profit in 1937, but they continued. Cummins stock was first publicly traded in 1947, just 10 years later. Steve Jobs brought Apple to life. J. Irwin Miller was the legend who gave vision to Cummins to become a global power leader. J. Irwin Miller was a polymath and a pioneer, bringing a humanitarian sensibilities to the business world. And in doing so, he built a legacy that has carried to this day. We have decades of his Cummins business records in the Heritage Center, and what a story they tell. Let's provide a little more background on Mr. Miller. As Steve noticed and noted, J. Irwin Miller is W.G. Irwin's great nephew and started his career with Cummins in 1934 as a general manager. He had a different background from traditional businessmen. His humanities education and his experience in the Navy in World War II brought Mr. Miller and a new way of thinking into the company. This new way of thinking was the stakeholder model, one of the very first companies in America to have this stakeholder view. The stakeholder view is that stakeholders are more than shareholders, although shareholders are certainly very important. But the stakeholders include other people like our customers, our employees, our communities, our suppliers. Each has a vital interest in the health and success of our company. It is only in recent years that other companies are talking this way now about their stakeholders. Unlike his contemporaries in the 1940s, he did not actively oppose unions either. His position was employees could make a choice, and Cummins employees chose not to join United Auto Workers, but form their own local union. The result was a more harmonious relationship between the company and the union organization. Mr. Miller believed that a business was only as strong as the communities where they are located. That forms the cornerstone of Cummins' investment in its communities through the Cummins Foundation. Strong communities help business flourish. One of his greatest legacies was how he helped develop a program through the foundation to invest in world-class architects to design new buildings in Columbus. Steve Butler highlighted some of that legacy just a moment ago, particularly in Cummins facilities. Today, our small Midwestern city is known as the Athens of the Prairie for its architecture. Mr. Miller retired in 1977, and though he passed away in 2004, his influence is deeply felt to this day. Dr. Pear's story is compelling too. Dr. Pear joined Cummins in 1958 after fleeing communist Hungary. He made Columbus, Indiana his home and began a 41-year career at Cummins as an engineer and leader. Dr. Pear inspired and encouraged many of our Cummins employees. His legacy continues today with the annual Dr. Julius A. Pear Award, a prized distinction for our top employee inventors. In the Heritage Center, we have ribbon copies of many of the hundreds of patents received by Cummins employees over the decades, including some of those by Classy Cummins and Dr. Pear. In 2019, we celebrated the 100th anniversary as a company. For 102 years now, We have defined ourselves by our unwavering values and our promise of innovation and dependability. We've led our industry by consistently turning challenges into opportunities. In the next 100 years, we will continue to defy boundaries and unleash our ingenuity in a world hungry for new power solutions. We will create opportunity for our people, our customers, our communities, and the planet we all share. We were founded in 1919 as Cummins Engine Company, a corporation in Columbus, Indiana, and one of the first diesel engine manufacturers. In 2001, we changed our name to Cummins Inc. Today, we are a global power leader that designs, manufactures, distributes, and services diesel and natural gas engines and powertrain-related component products, including filtration, aftertreatment, turbochargers, fuel systems, control systems, air handling systems, transmissions, electric power generation systems, batteries, and electrified power systems. That's quite a list. Today, we proudly serve our customers through a network of over 500 wholly owned joint venture and independent distributor locations and over 9,000 Cummins certified dealer locations with service to approximately 190 countries and territories. In 2020, we continued to invest in future critical technologies and products. We also invested in the power of our past by establishing the Cummins Heritage Center, a place designed to bridge the past with the present and the future. We will continue to make investments to improve our current technologies, meet future emission requirements around the world, and improve fuel economy. The Heritage Center is tasked to collect evidence of these activities. Not only do we have to look back to make sure the record is there, we must anticipate the future. The Heritage Center materials reflect the principal manufacturing and distribution locations of our 5 core businesses, which you see up here. We have records from all of them, although our holdings are strongest, of course, in Columbus materials, but we are actively seeking materials from other locations. New technologies are a crucial piece of Cummins' future success for these next 100 years. We are a technological leader today in our core businesses, and we believe that this is fundamental to our strategy. But here are some of the key technology areas that Cummins is studying in our business development area. These have the potential for application across our markets and in our new growth areas. Our Vice President and Chief Technical Officer, Jim Fear, has been studying most of these areas for many years now. It's important to say that we have already been working in most of these areas for a number of years in our research and technology function and in partnerships with universities and national laboratories. The Heritage Center has some of these records too. A number of these technologies now appear to be economically viable in the immediate upcoming years. Moreover, there is considerable innovation happening outside of our company that we need to capitalize on, which is why Cummins is adding acquisitions and partnerships to our existing R&T efforts. The Heritage Center must be cognizant of these too. We've entered into multiple joint venture agreements and alliances with business partners around the world. Our joint ventures are either distribution or manufacturing entities. We also own controlling interests in non-wholly owned manufacturing and distribution subsidiaries. This is just a snapshot of some of the largest partnerships we have. We in the archives track all of these relationships and collect what materials we can. We find quite a few materials in the records of our company officers. We last created our mission, vision, and values in 2002 when we had a fraction of the revenue and half the employees that we have today. Since just 2002, our revenue has nearly tripled and the number of our employees has doubled. Through significant Cummins leadership team, global leadership engagement, global focus groups, and incorporation of employee feedback, socialization, and testing, we developed our story. You'll notice in our story, many things are staying the same. The core of who we are is not different, but there are new things that make our story relevant for who we are today. The Cummins story is clear, but not overly prescriptive. We connected the elements so that the documents fit together and have cohesion, but are also meaningful standing alone. If we continue to be guided by the culture that has always made this company great, nothing can stop us. We are committed to bringing customers the right solution at the right time and meeting our customers no matter where they are in their journey. We are not willing to help our customers reduce their carbon footprints and wait where possible today. We continue to invest in all of these technologies to ensure we remain the best partner as industries go through the energy transition journey in the future. We continue to grow globally by being the best in terms of technological innovation and bringing our customers the most reliable, high quality, fuel efficient, and clean power solutions. The next few slides are going to briefly discuss our power portfolio. As the Heritage Center, our work involves making sure we retain evidence of these activities. So our job is to anticipate and stay current while simultaneously looking at the past. The new power business unit will drive much of Cummins' second century. There are a trio of core technologies in the new power business unit sites. As Bruce concluded in his talk, innovation is the history of Cummins, and it is also the future. These three core technologies are leading the way. Similar to our other core businesses, we see application and innovation opportunities around the globe, so we must collect evidence of activities from across the globe. We envision complementary technologies as well, service and support for systems and components and recycling of components, all for charging, connectivity, fuel generation, and supply. I look at this picture and see a lot more stuff to target for collecting. Many new power initiatives are already in use. The records of this work are what will be in our second century archives. These are some examples of all of the things that we're working with. Cummins also has a lot of demonstrator applications, so our engineers and customers can see how this stuff works. So I think these are so cool. I love this. I wonder if we can get some of these things in our archives. What do you think? Can we get that little thing in our archives? Wouldn't that be awesome? I think that would be a great thing. All right, it looks pretty cool, you have to admit. Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you tonight.
Thank you very much. Am I live here on both? Okay. Thank you very much. And Lori and everyone from the Cummins Heritage Center, I know Marsh Davis, President CEO, has a fantastic book that talks a little bit about the Indiana Landmarks rescued and restored, 60 years of great history, but also we'll be making Indiana Automotive a donation to the Heritage Center so that you can continue the good work and talk about the history and the future that's coming. I think we can all agree that Indiana is very lucky to have Cummins as a corporate citizen partner and continuing the leading edge of automotive evolution and energy evolution that began more than 100 years ago, and also in a small farm field, 16th Street and Speedway that's now known, that started as an automotive testing grounds, it's now known as the greatest spectacle in racing. So great to see that history still alive today and moving into the future. Want to open it up for questions. Also want to be sensitive to time. So if you've got some questions, please feel free to raise your hand and share. Otherwise, We'll also, I'm sure you'll be willing to hang around and talk a little bit more about some of the great architecture and putting your hands on historic cars and having them go around the Brickyard and the new power that's coming out of Columbus and Indianapolis and being shared from around the world. So does anybody have any questions right now that they would like addressed? Yes. Where are the race cars today that raced in the 50s? I can actually answer that one. Well, I'm here. So Cummins owns the iconic 1952 pole winning car. And years ago, the other 4 cars were donated to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. In the last 5 years, Bruce and his team worked extensively in partnership with the IMS Museum on restoring those cars to be able to get all 5 running for the very first time in 2019 as part of the pre-race ceremonies at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And because I believe, if I'm telling the story correctly, there was some swapping of parts over the years, that there hadn't been a time when all 5 cars were put together. So thanks to the innovation, engineering, some production technology, they were able to replicate some of the shared parts. And so we were able to, they were able to have all 5 cars be part of the pre-race ceremony, having drivers such as Tony Stewart, Lynn St. James, Al Unser Sr., who won in a Cummins-sponsored car for his 4th win, along with some Cummins employees and executives. So it was a fantastic sight to see those 5 cars all in motion for the first time together. And that's a testament to what the Cummins restoration team and their ability to go back into history and to bring it to life again today. And they are currently in Columbus. I don't know if you've seen the IMS Museum. It's a little packed for space. And they have recently, as you may have known, the mythical basement that exists, which has long been storage for, just storage, is now, as part of their new mission, is now available to be seen by the public for a very low fee. Jason Bansick, our curator of vehicles, can tell you everything that's down there. And I think, including the last Ferrari to win the 24-hour Le Mans outright, in addition to some incredible Indiana-made passenger cars and other race cars. So we're very glad to have them where they can be shared, seen, and visible with the group that Cummins and the Heritage Center has done to restore those. Great question. Yes.
More of a comment. I'm a Columbus Cummins girl, and it's just wonderful to see all of this. And I know members of the Cummins family, the Miller family, about everything in between. And just delightful to see all of this. I like the credit given to Plessy Cummins. He was an innovator. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. I'm Molly Head. I produce Hoosier History Live, and we've done some great shows as well about Columbus and Cummins.
Well, thank you for saying so. And while I'm sorry he didn't make it to New Orleans, surely he wasn't going for Mardi Gras in February. That'd have been a little cold, but I admire the intent. And if you look at the architecture in Columbus and the fact that there is a feature film that was named Columbus, focusing on architecture with a leading actor who had also participated in the great blockbuster Star Trek, Columbus is known, John Cho. So they certainly have had an impact that's recognized throughout the world. What else? Yes, sir. Two questions.
After World War II, Germany came out with their initial line of cars as diesel engine cars. They were very small. Germany, through Daimler, has captured the market in diesel powered automobiles. And secondly, where is Cummins looking at that particular market, which is now being dominated, for the most part, by Daimler of Germany? And the second is, when Plessy Cummins was designing this engine, how much of the technology came from Germany in their diesel submarines? He had to find some information about those submarines, which he transformed into his own ideas. I don't know that answer. Maybe someone here knows that he was able to tap in to the German submarines in World War I, maybe World War II.
So the question is how much influence did the German submarines and their engineering of their engines impact or influence Plessy Cummins and his design? Did I sum that up correctly for our viewers at home? Panel, do you want to take a shot at it, or rest on the incredible laurels and the innovations that came out of Plessy as a result of any influence? Okay, we're going to hold. We're going to address that one after the fact. So hold on to that question. We'll circle back with you one-on-one. Anything else? All right. Okay, one more, last one. How long was Plessy involved with the business? After. So there, and I believe there's still family that's employed there. If you mentioned Cummins. So how long was Plessy directly involved with the company?
He retired from the company in the late 40s.
Yeah, 1947.
Retired late 40s, so right after World War II. All right. Well, this will all be recorded, and I know we'll have some folks around to ask more questions afterwards. We really thank you for being here. Indiana Automotive is grateful for your support. We hope you'll join us in South Bend or take a nice road trip to Columbus. But South Bend in 2022 for the Studebaker and some great programs there. And if you would, please exit out the door behind you where Marsh Davis is currently residing. And you'll be able to walk around either side of the building to get back to the parking lot. But thank you so much for being here on behalf of Indiana Landmarks Indiana Automotive. We appreciate your support. Good night.